In police crime museums all over Europe, there are items of evidence that have brought some of the world's worst criminals to justice. Behind every object in these black museums is a fascinating and sometimes macabre story. When police come across bodies that have been burnt, it's very important to establish the exact cause of death, because it's not uncommon for murderers to dispose of their victim or to disguise how they died by using the consuming power of fire. In cases that appear to be accidental, it's the things that indicate whether a person was alive or dead at the time of the fire, which are vitally important. The infamous bonfire night murder looked at first to be an accidental fire, but closer inspection revealed that a horrific murder had taken place, creating a mystery that remains to this day. After an evening of firework festivities celebrating Guy Fawkes Night, most of Britain was sleeping. Just after 2 a.m. on the 6th of November 1930, cousins Bill Bailey and Alf Brown were making their way home. They were heading towards the village of Hardingston, south of Northampton, when they met a stranger on the road.
All of a sudden, somebody comes out of the hedge, you see, hesitates. And Alf, at the same time, Alf Brown said, "Oh, there's a blaze along there." So this fella seemed a bit nervous. He stood there, he said, "Oh, I suppose somebody's got a bonfire." He went towards the London Road, and of course the boys ran along to the fire.
What confronted them was a small car, completely ablaze, and through the flames they thought they could see a body. The two ran for help. When the fire was finally extinguished, the body was seen to be lying face down in the passenger seat. It wasn't until about 5:30 a.m. that the two cousins, Brown and Bailey, mentioned their encounter with the stranger and what he had said to them. Police immediately issued an appeal for this man to come forward to help them with their inquiries. And though the fire had caused much damage, the number plate of the car, a Morris Minor, had survived the fire. This quickly identified the owner as Alfred Arthur Rouse from North London. At this point, the body in the car was assumed to be that of Alfred Rouse, and his wife was asked to accompany the police to Northampton to identify the body. But identification couldn't take place. The body was quite unrecognisable. Indeed, some thought it was that of a woman. Then just a day later, the police and Mrs. Rouse got a surprise. Far from being burned to death, Alfred Rouse was in fact alive and on his way to London. When he stepped off the coach, Rouse was arrested. He said, "I'm glad it's over. I was coming to see you. I was responsible." At first, Rouse's explanation about the fire and the body in the car seemed plausible. He stated that he had picked up a man on the Great North Road. He seemed respectable and said he was going to the Midlands. Rouse said that he then became sleepy. He could hardly keep awake, and he had also noticed that the car was running out of petrol. Then he told police that he wanted to relieve himself, and he said to the man, "There's some petrol in the can. You can empty it into the tank while I'm gone." He lifted the bonnet and showed him where to put the petrol in. Rouse then stated that he had gone some distance along the road. When he glanced back over his shoulder, he saw his car was on fire and ran back. He said, "I saw the man was inside and I tried to open the door, but I couldn't, as the car was then a mass of flames." Rouse said that he had no idea what the man's name was. The police hoped that the post-mortem might shed some light on his identity. Sir Bernard Spilsbury was called onto the case, and 5 days after the fire, he examined the charred remains.
The intensity of the heat had wrought terrible damage. The top of the head, the vault of the skull was completely destroyed. Also the face and ears, the front of the chest, forearms and hands, and parts of the upper limbs as well. Relying on what he believed to be a fragment of prostate gland, Spilsbury stated that the body was that of a man.
Colonel Cuthbert Buckle, a well-known fire loss assessor, was also called in to investigate. He had 26 years of experience and had looked into over 10,000 cases of fire. All the clues at the site of the Morris Minor pointed to a deliberate act of arson. Most of the natural ignition sources in the car are in the engine. Here, this area was virtually untouched. The rear tyres were severely damaged compared to those at the front, and it was obvious that the fire had started in the passenger compartment. For Colonel Buckle, the fact that there had been intense and sustained fire under the vehicle indicated that a large quantity of petrol had poured through the floor of the car. Spilsbury found a piece of cloth in a fork of the victim's left leg. It was soaked with petrol, and its presence also implied that petrol had drenched the car's passenger. Buckle found that the petrol union joint under the carburettor was one whole turn slack, and reasoned that this had been done deliberately. He believed that a trail of petrol had then been laid from the car and ignited. Police were looking for a motive for such a callous crime, and eventually, Inspector Lawrence from Northamptonshire Police felt he was getting close to one. Rouse had become quite relaxed and confident in Lawrence's company. He began to speak to him of his private life, most significantly about what he called his harem.
Rouse had a weakness for the ladies. He was said to have seduced about 80 women in his travels around the south of England. And apart from this harem, there were more long-term relationships of women that he'd married bigamously and had about 4 or 5 children in all from them. His wife can't have seen very much of him.
Inspector Lawrence discovered that Rouse's circumstances had become even more complicated. On that fateful bonfire night, Rouse had visited Nellie Tucker, who had just given birth to a second child by him, while in South Wales, another woman, Ivy Jenkins, was also expecting his baby. His trial opened at Northampton Assizes in January 1931. Rouse was charged with murder. The prosecution alleged that he planned to receive insurance money that had been taken out on his life and car. They would claim that he had staged a fire and murdered an innocent person in an attempt to fake his own death.
Well, my father, in acting for the defence, maintained that it wasn't necessary for him to do somebody in to bring about the belief that he'd done a disappearing trick.
2 aspects of the crime dominated the proceedings: how the blaze was started and whether the man was alive at the time.
The vital question as to whether a victim is alive or dead at the start of a fire can be answered in a simple manner. If a blood specimen is tested and found to be positive for carbon monoxide, then it shows that they were breathing. Spilsbury's opinion was that the cause of death was shock due to fire, and he believed that death would have occurred within half a minute.
Norman Burkitt, the prosecuting counsel, reminded the court that when Rouse saw the 2 cousins in the lane, he just said to them, "Oh, I think someone's having a bonfire up there." No appeal for assistance, no call for help, nothing.
I don't think Rouse was able to conceal his true nature of being an arrogant person and very self-satisfied, and my father has said that he begged Rouse not to give evidence, and he said, "If you give evidence, it will probably be curtains."
Rouse was convicted of the murder of an unknown man and sentenced to death. Accounts recall that at this sombre moment, Rouse himself seemed strangely unperturbed, smiling to the many tearful women in the court and acknowledging the assembled pressmen.
The whole of his sexual life coloured the minds of the jury so much, and he had a very powerful prosecuting counsel in Sir Norman Burkitt, and I think the 2 made it almost impossible to secure an acquittal.
On the 10th of March 1931, Alfred Arthur Rouse was hanged. Shortly after his execution, the Daily Sketch newspaper published what was supposed to be his death cell confession. In it, he claimed to have met the man who would become his victim on 3 occasions, and on the night of the murder, plied him with a bottle of whiskey. He claimed to have strangled him into unconsciousness and then loosened the fuel pipe before dousing the man with petrol, setting the lot on fire.
There are several curious mysteries about this case. One that interests me is Lily, Rouse's long-suffering wife. If it was an insurance scam, then Lily would have had to have collected it for him, because, of course, you can't collect your own life insurance, so you have to wonder whether she was in on the deal.
When the unknown victim was buried, many people came to pay their respects. To this day, a cross still marks his grave. Our next case took place in 1933, echoing in many ways the Rouse murder of just 3 years before. It attracted huge publicity and prompted one of the biggest manhunts that Scotland Yard had ever undertaken. Just before 8 o'clock on the evening of the 3rd of January 1933, smoke was seen billowing from a shed in a builder's yard in Hawley Crescent, Camden Town, in London.
As a kid, I lived in Camden Town, and we heard the fire engines at this time, and police gongs as well. We followed them up, being kids, and we looked through this fence, and we could see a kind of a hut that was there, and that was on fire.
The shed was divided into two parts. One part was a storage room. The other part was a basic office. At one end of the room, through the poisonous black smoke, firemen could make out a body. It was seated on a tall chair in front of a high table. When the body was removed, it was seen to be male. But apart from that, very little else could be made out. The features of the face had been burned away, and the man's clothing had fused to the skin of his arms and body. The corpse was removed to St Pancras mortuary, where a police surgeon stated that death was due to burning. But who was this victim of such a terrible fire?
Police initially attended. It seemed very straightforward. A man had committed suicide because outside was found a suicide note. Signed Furness, beer all, no money, no work, goodbye.
The premises had indeed been rented to a Samuel James Furness, a self-employed builder and contractor, and when a man who lodged with him was asked to identify the remains, he confirmed that it was the aptly named Furness who had gone up in flames, and the case was almost put to bed.
It seems to me that although there wasn't a fire investigator at the scene of this fire, that those who did investigate it took things at face value. The fact that someone had set fire to themselves and remained seated is never going to happen. My experience is that people suffering that degree of pain, even if they have set fire to themselves, end up running around in pain and agony.
Bentley Purchase, the district coroner, decided to take a look at the body.
Bentley Purchase examined the body, looked at it laying on its back, and then Purchase asked that the body be turned over, which probably shook most people, because I suspect at that point he was the first one that had ever done that. And when the body was turned over, quite obviously, just on the left-hand side above the lumbar region, there was a bullet hole.
The police were now galvanised out of complacency. A search of the dead man's clothes revealed a half-burned post office book in the name of W. Spatchett and a wallet, empty except for several scraps of paper, also bearing the same name. Walter Spatchett, like Furness, was missing.
Identifying victims of fire is often achieved through examining dental records, and this was the case when Walter Spatchett's dentist was asked to examine the dead man's teeth. He very quickly recognised a misshapen tooth in the upper jaw.
Investigation revealed that Spatchett and Samuel Furness had been friends. Spatchett had given odd jobs to Furness, and the two played cards together. It was known that on the afternoon he went missing, Spatchett would have been carrying takings from his rent collections, about £35. His wallet, however, had been empty. Police were now dealing with a case of burglary and murder, and Samuel Furness was the prime suspect. Furness was 42 years old and had served in the First World War. Police discovered that he had never returned the service revolver that he had been issued with. By 1933, Furness had his own small business, but it wasn't doing well. In fact, his friend Walter Spatchett had been bailing him out, and Furness owed him money. And despite a seemingly happy marriage to his wife May, he was known to have several expensive lady friends. In spite of his money problems, Furness had managed to renew his life insurance, a policy that would pay out £1,000 on his death. Furness had to be found. The newspapers called it history's greatest manhunt, and after a tip-off, the search centred on Southend. The Essex police set up roadblocks around the town. Furness couldn't be found. In what was the first announcement of its kind, BBC Radio carried with its regular news bulletin an appeal for information as to the whereabouts of Samuel Furness, saying that he was wanted for willful murder.
He is believed to be in possession of a service revolver.
Then events took a dramatic turn. Charles Tuckfield, Furness's brother-in-law, walked into a police station in Kentish Town, near Camden, and handed them a letter. It was signed H. Farmer, but it was obviously from Samuel Furness. It read, "Just a line to you in hope that I shall be able to see a friend before I end it all. I'm writing because I know they will watch May for a long time." He then described how exhausted he was from being on the run, before asking his brother-in-law to come and see him. He gave no address, only directions from the station, instructing Charles Tuckfield to travel to Southend that Sunday. It appeared that Furness had been hiding in Southend all along. The police told Tuckfield that he must follow his brother-in-law's directions.
The brother-in-law walked down Wycliffe Road, right opposite the station. And as he walked down, apparently, a card was put into the window of number 11 saying, Sam. So he then went into the house. And he then spent an hour and a half actually in the house, obviously talking to Samuel Furness. Police either end of the road, knowing he's in number 11, they come over the gardens. It really must have been quite an amusing thing, you know. They actually got somebody with a fiddle to walk up the road pretending he's a busker, playing the Roses of Piccadilly, and while he's trying to see what's going on. And when eventually the brother-in-law came out and made off, the police went over the back fence into the kitchen of number 11, where the old lady there, shocked, she told him he was in the front room. They go in and he's sitting by the fire and they arrest him.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Walter Spatchett.
Furness was taken back to London, and during the journey he admitted to killing Walter Spatchett, but said that it had been an accident. He said in his statement that he and Spatchett had talked in his office and that he'd shown him his gun.
And he said, well, don't play about with it, it's loaded. The door opened, knocked his hand, and the gun went off, you know. Well, if you can believe that, you'll believe anything.
He said that the idea of setting fire to Spatchett's body had at first seemed too terrible, but it looked like there was no other way out. He said, I put the body in the office chair, pouring over it oil and paint. I screwed up a lot of paper on the floor and stood a lit candle in the middle of it. I wrote a note on a paper pad, put it in the tool shed, making out that I committed suicide. Furness was put into a cell. He was offered a meal, but told the officer in charge that he just wanted to sleep.
Before central heating and things like that, places were cold, police stations were cold. People, you know, wore jumpers and they wore coats all the time. And Furness wore his overcoat. And at 7 o'clock the next morning, a police officer looks into the cell to see him swallowing the contents of a small glass vial. By the time the police officer got the keys, got in there, he's on the floor writhing in tremendous agony.
Inside the bottle had been hydrochloric acid, commonly known as spirits of salt. It had been stitched into the lining of Furness's overcoat. Furness was rushed to hospital, but the following morning he was dead. His last words, my dear wife. Following his death, there were 2 inquests. The first brought in the verdict that Samuel Furness had committed suicide. The second, that Furness had killed Walter Spatchett in an act of willful and premeditated murder. If it wasn't for the questions raised by the coroner, Bentley Purchase, about the strangeness of a man sitting himself down to die in a fire, the bullet hole in the burned body would never have been discovered. All would have believed that Samuel Furness had gone up in flames.
Interestingly enough, the insurance policy stated that it was invalid if he committed suicide within 1 year. Well, of course, he then tried to fake the suicide after 1 year, 3 days. In reality, he did commit suicide because when he was arrested, he took the hydrochloric acid. So, right, ironically, he tried to fake one, but actually did it in the end. The insurance company refused to pay out anyway, but they did make May, his wife, one-off payment as a show of good faith.
The cases of Alfred Rouse and Samuel Furness presented investigators with intriguing problems, some of which will never be solved. For love of women and lack of money, both men resorted to murder and saw fire as a means of covering up their crimes. If the fire at Furness's office had raged a little longer, it would have totally destroyed his former friend. But perhaps if he had studied Rouse's crime of 3 years earlier, he would have noted that even what appears to be a perfect murder can have unexpected consequences. Burning had all but consumed Rouse's victim, but the scene of a fire, however extreme, will reveal its secrets to those who know where to look.